What does history tell us about the older prospects? Find out next on Locked On NBA Big Board. Welcome into Locked On NBA Big Board. I'm Leif Thulin, joined by Draft Junkie James, and we're gonna have a debate here, and I think we're gonna agree on some of it, but I think we're bound to disagree on some. And the question is, history's not that kind of older prospects. There are some that are looked at pretty kindly here. So, but without further ado, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That turns into $150 bucks with any $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, James, I know you've done a lot of research on this, and this is something that you had in your mind. So I'm excited to hear kind of your stances, because I got a few on that vary between player to player on how I foresee them doing. So I'll turn it over to you, and you got the soapbox.
Okay. So we talked about history. Does history favor the older prospects? So I'm going to run down just a list of names of the past, I think 10 years, guys who, and when I think about this, I think about not the guys who were born like in the summertime who could swing between I was young for my class versus I was old for my class. I feel like that year does make a difference, but without further ado, so Malcolm Brogdon, I think he played as a 23-year-old rookie. Malcolm Brogdon can play, obviously. Cam Johnson, he was a lottery pick as a 23-year-old rookie. Denzel Valentine was a 23-year-old rookie. Brandon Clark, good results, 23. Chris Duarte from Oregon, he played as a 23-year-old rookie. Davion Mitchell, Sacramento. Kyle Kuzma was 22. I believe he went 27th. Obi Toppin was 23, coming out of Dayton. And then Matisse Thybulle was 22. And there are other guys. I guess the most notably four-year guy, Desmond Bain, drafted 30. I think he's a max player. He's a big-time player. So, as you can see, it's a mixed bag of results. But going forward, especially in this draft, we all can agree that Dalton Knecht is a lottery pick, right? We're not going to argue there. But there has been mention of Tristan Da Silva being a first-round pick. I've seen Kevin McCullar mocked as a first-round pick. Tyler Kolek mocked as a first-round pick. These guys are bona fide today 23-year-olds. And then there are guys that I'm personally a fan of. Isaiah Crawford out of Louisiana Tech, he's 23. And Tyon Grant Foster, he's also 23. So history is going to say not all – at any age in general, not all of these guys are going to pan out. But I'm just interested to hear your argument, NBA draft Twitter argument of why they think their particular favorite old guy is going to have success at the next level.
Yeah, and I think the discussion is more and more prevalent today because CBA is kind of dictating that teams want to get players that are ready. And so that typically means more basketball, the bit readier you are. And that's not a perfect science, but like Jaime Jaquez played a ton of basketball. I know he wasn't as old as the guys we're talking about now, but he's going to be used as a model for the next couple of years because it's a copycat league. And because he played a ton of basketball and he was ready to contribute right away. Or even a guy like Christian Brown 2 years ago played substantial minutes on a team that won a championship. And then this year, I know that he's getting some of the blame of, they lost Bruce Brown and Reggie Jackson and Peyton Watson weren't ready to fulfill that vacancy. But the logic was that he won a championship in college, played a lot of college basketball, and he was ready to go. So I think there's going to be more and more older players viewed more favorably than in years past because of the necessity of having players ready and having good depth. The teams that are still competing right now in the playoffs have 8 or 9 guys that are really solid, and they fill out their 240 minutes really nicely. As a team, that's 48 times 5, so I'm not losing my marbles for those of you guys wondering. But I think that Dalton Knecht's a lottery guy, and then the question really begins with like Devin Carter or Baylor Scheiermann, 2 guys that were all Big East, all American type of guys. And I've had both of them in my top 20 pretty much all year. but the sample size of guys that old who've played as much basketball isn't that kind. And that's where the debate begins. Like, while I can spin the yarn that I think Scheiermann's worthy of that top 15 pick, and a ton of people can say that about Devin Carter, who I have about 17 or 18, I think it becomes a really fascinating game of, okay, how much does that immediate return on investment matter compared to if you draft a 20-year-old who ends up being good in a few years? So that's kind of where I'm curious, because this was your idea. And do I sense some pessimism about some of these prospects, or are you kind of individual basis?
It's an individual basis. Like I mentioned, I'm higher on some of the older guys, but let me pick your brain, Leaf. Baylor Scheiermann, top 15. Tell me why.
Well, I think in this class, it really pays to have immediate skills. And his immediate skills are he can really shoot the ball. He's big for his position, which I think he can be the 2 or the 3. And he rebounds the ball at an unbelievable level. He averaged 19 and 9 and played a role. He also was a point guard earlier, and that's not what his role is going to be, but he's got complementary skill sets. Like, he can play as a secondary ball handler who can come off a side pick and roll and make the right reads. I think he'll shoot 40% for the majority of his career from 3. And I think that if he has a lesser role and is given the ball when he's open and he comes off pin downs and shoots, I think he'll do very well at that. I've likened him to George Niang in the sense that Niang's big for his position and not necessarily sexy for what he does, but what he does well is he knocks down shots, he plays solid positional defense, and he's a coveted player off the bench, both as a locker room guy who, as Jazz fans, I'm wearing the Jazz hat. Like, when he left, the locker room became far, far worse, and that was a big deal. And then also, he's a knockdown shooter who's got size at his position. I think he's a small forward version of Niang, and maybe a little bit similar to Max Strus in that sense as well. Maybe not quite the dynamic mover as a shooter, but I think if you're to mix those two players together, I think you get a really solid player. And in a draft where there's a lot of, okay, like this guy that we could be drafting in the top 10 might not have an NBA skill. I think he's got a few NBA skills that keep him available and thriving, whereas there's going to be some that fall off the face of the earth.
I like Baylor Scheiermann. He reminds me of, and when I talk with my brother, I say complexion comparison. So I'm going to make a white on white complexion comparison. He reminds me of Joe Ingles, right? Where the game is really, really slow. He can pass, he can knock down shots. He's going to rebound. I think Scheiermann's a great rebounder. I mean, the numbers, they match up, and like he understands and he competes. So if you were selling me on taking the 23-year-old that does 3 things, that can shoot, pass, and dribble, I would be perfectly fine with Scheiermann. I see a lot of people, when I did post my mock, like I didn't have Tristan Da Silva in my first round, and I feel like Scheiermann is a better basketball player, or I'm getting more from Scheiermann than I would get from a Tristan Da Silva. I think Tristan Da Silva is talented, but he just shoots. And he's not the playmaker, and he's not the defender of some of the other guys that we can talk about in another segment. But, like, I get it. You won't hear me making an argument against Devin Carter. I've had Devin Carter in my top 20 since, like, December. So, like, I get it with him.
Let's talk about Devin Carter next. I got one more question for this segment, though.
Okay.
Dalton Knecht. We agree he's a lottery. Most people have him top 10. We talked about him on yesterday's podcast together. What is the reservation in terms of if you were to have a reservation? What is it about his game? Is it does he stagnate? Does he not grow because he's older, or do you think that is, in this individual basis, not really much of a concern because he grew so much in year to year in college?
I think. See, I have him 8th, and I'm comfortable there. I think the jump shot is good. I think he's more of a scorer than a shooter. And if he doesn't pan out to be a 15 point per game guy, like I think he can be, is because he is more of a scorer than a shooter, or he just maybe is on a team where he's not the guy. He did catch people by surprise, at least going from the conference that he was in at Northern Colorado to the SEC, and he's no slouch in the SEC. But I've seen people say, he may not be the defender that you think he is. I know he's not the playmaker, but I think even in the drilled down role, he should be able to be like a Max Strus type guy. And again, I think at the next level, he's going to have to be more of a shooter than a scorer just because the volume won't be there. But that's not just him. That's going to be a lot of these 18, 19-year-old guys too.
Yeah, I'm with you right there. I think he's going to be a specialist, but someone who can really be good at that role. Well, coming up next, we're going to continue to debate about older prospects, including Devin Carter. But first, let me tell you guys about FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You can even look at the playoffs and say, okay, like how many points is Anthony Edwards going to score, more or less? You can look at that, or you could bet on the game itself between the Mavericks and the T-Wolves. So make sure to look at that on FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Also, are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All righty, we're back here, and the question of the day is, why are old prospects so polarizing in this draft? Because yes, there's the allure that they're more ready, but there's also the history that says they're typically not as productive as you'd think. So let's talk about a guy who was incredibly productive at Providence. That's Devin Carter. Devin Carter was the Big East Player of the Year in a team, and that was including over a couple first-team All-Americans. Like Tristan Newton, first-team All-American, champion, two-time champion. Well, Devin Carter was the best player in the Big East, and I think that was a properly given award. So with all that productivity, defensive tenacity, shooting numbers that were impressive, why is there even a concern? And I know you said you're in on Devin Carter, but give me both sides of this, because I know you're in. Give me the pitch as to why, and then if there was a reason he doesn't succeed, what would it be?
All right, so the why, he just gets after it. He's like, I think at the next level, he's like light-skinned Pat Beverly. Like, you can't deny a guy that's 6'2", 6'3", with those rebounding numbers, and just his tenacity. When I forget his teammate's name, Bryce
Hopkins
went down, he like stepped it up a whole notch at Providence. He kept them in games. I think he isn't a point guard per se. I think he's a Javon Carter point guard. He's going to be your complimentary point guard. I have him mocked to Phoenix because I think I don't think a rookie point guard is going to come in and solve Phoenix's playmaking problems right now. But I feel like somebody that's going to be able to play off the ball, play off those guys, and bring that competitive edge and still be like an athlete will help them. But I like him. But at the same time, you want to know my cons. So we talked about the shooting improvements. We talked about the jump that he's made. Let's see. I have the numbers here. At South Carolina, freshman year, he was at 27% from three. Sophomore year, he was at 29% from three. This year, he shoots 38% from three, and you like the volume on 7 attempts. But we saw 2-3 seasons ago a guy who, small guard, defensive-minded, made a lot of threes. He made
I know
a big
exactly
jump,
who it is.
and it was Davion Mitchell.
Yep.
And what do we have with Davion Mitchell right now? He's a backup point guard in the NBA, and he was drafted in the lottery. He was drafted in a very tough situation. I'll shoot Davion Mitchell some bail, when Sabonis is not there and when Fox is not there, he looks the part. But that's just not the case for him. Mm-hmm. That's not the situation he's in. He has to play off of Sabonis because Sabonis is essentially their backup point guard. So, but as a starter, he looks the part. So I'm not saying he's not an NBA player. That's obviously not the case. But it's almost like, for lack of a better term, he tricked people with his shooting because he hasn't been able to keep those same shooting splits that he had at Baylor and bring them to the NBA. So there is that chance that could be Devin Carter this year.
Yeah, the one thing I would say distinguishes those two is Carter's volume was significantly higher than Davion Mitchell's from three. The concern I would have would be, Yes, he's a really good rebounder at the college level. Yes, he's a really good defender at the college level. And he's scored those 20 points a game. I don't think he scores at the NBA, but no one's asking him to.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends on how switchable he is, because if he's not a true point guard, how well does he hound two guards with his lack of length? Because, I mean, there's the famous kind of quote of Pat Bev and Lou Will doing a press conference, and they're trying to guard Kevin Durant. He scores 51. They're like, that's Kevin Durant. I promise we're trying. And I understand that's Kevin Durant, but the reason I bring that up is no matter how hard and defensively tenacious you are, sometimes bigger guys just kind of know how to score. And that's who Devin Carter's that's who he's going to be guarding. That's like what you want from him.
Exactly.
And if he doesn't shoot well, and then does he become Javon Carter? So it's harder to teach an old dog new tricks than some of these younger guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the cautionary tale for Devin Carter. Like I said, I have 17 or 18, but there are some trepidations, but I would typically bet on his track record, his genes. His father played in the NBA, was a good player. And I just kind of think he's a safer bargain than some of the guys that are in that same realm of the draft. But I wouldn't necessarily take him top 12, as I've seen some boards say. That's a little rich for my liking.
That's too much for me. He's not even like a high level playmaker, even for that. Like, I feel like he's going to be an off the ball pit bull throughout his career. So like, I don't see the playmaking and be like, okay, that's a top 12 pick. You know what I'm saying? Because like you said, it's a tall man's league. We're still going to hunt him. I don't care if he is our best defender on the perimeter. Like, he's 6'3", like, they're going to put him in pick and roll. Guys are going to try to get to their spots and shoot over the top of him. So, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see if those shooting numbers are legit.
Yeah, let's turn it over to one more veteran who's been on the scene for a while. This is Tristan Da Silva. You talked about him a little bit at the beginning. He's someone who's got an NBA skill, and he does have it, and that's the shot. The shot's real. Even at the beginning of the year when he struggled, I think there was still optimism from the draft community. I talked about this with Richard. I assume you and Raphael felt similarly, that even though he struggled at the beginning of the year, he could really shoot the ball.
Yeah.
He finished the year really strong. Colorado made a semi-decent run in March Madness. He was good in those games. But take me through why, even though he can shoot it, he has an NBA skill, that you have the kind of the doubts because he's an older player. And is it just that simple, that he's an older player and there's less time to kind of cultivate? Or I agree with you, though. I have reservations.
So he's an older player, but he just does one. You have to have this one thing is the main thing. You have to be able to shoot, but he only shoots. So let me make the pitch for some of my other older guys. So when I look at on synergy, Isaiah Crawford from Louisiana Tech, I think he played extremely well at the pit. All right. And if you haven't seen him, he looks the part. He looks like OG Anunoby. Like, he's got the same build. He runs the same way. He's got the same shoulder cut. He looks the part. Isaiah Crawford shot 42% on jump shots. Tristan Da Silva shot 41% on jump shots, according to synergy. 42% on catch and shoot jump shots for Crawford. 41% on Tristan Da Silva. Unguarded, Isaiah Crawford shot 48% on jump shots. Tristan Da Silva shot 49% on jump shots. Colorado plays in the Pac, whatever it is now, and Louisiana Tech was in the American Conference, I believe. I get it. Different opponents. But Isaiah Crawford was at like 1.8 blocks, 1.5 steals. Like, he's a defensive menace. And he looks like the mold that they make when you look and say, I want the next Kawhi Leonard. If you don't get the next Kawhi Leonard, you get OG Anunoby. You don't get OG Anunoby, you get some of these other guys. I feel like Isaiah Crawford, if I'm going to take an old guy, he's got to be able to do more than just shoot, because I expect you to contribute right away. So, like, and then on a different scale, another guy that I'm a fan of is Tyon Grant Foster. Now, Tyon Grant Foster I think he's 24. He had some health concerns, but he's one of the better athletes in this draft, period. And him being 24 doesn't scare me because he hasn't played a lot of basketball. So, like, I feel like there's still some development there with him just because of injuries, health concerns. But he shot 41% unguarded, and he shot 40% on catch and shoot. And his numbers off the jump shot were at 35%. But if you watch his tape, his shot diet is unlike anybody else's. Right?
It's not good.
It's
Like
not good,
you
but
watch Grand Canyon
talent
play
there.
Alabama in the
Yeah,
round of 32, and you sigh most of the time
yeah.
that someone even shot the ball in that game. So, but the
But
talent's there. The
the
talent's
talent
there,
is there,
and the
and
productivity's there. Whereas Da Silva, the productivity's in one facet.
again, I think he is an underrated defender too. He was almost at like 1.7 steals, 1.5 blocks. He had like 32 dunks. Like he is an athlete. And while you may say his film against Alabama wasn't the prettiest, but like he kept him in the game, and that's just the role that he had. Now in a drill down role, is he going to be able to be a great catch and shoot guy? Could be, but I know his wing defense is going to translate. So it's like with Da Silva, I just need more from him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Da Silva, the reason that I probably will end up banking on right now, I've got him about 31, 32
That's where I have him at.
on my board. The reason I'll likely just convince myself, you know what, he'll be good is he's just the ultimate heady player. Like when your team needs a good, like smart, slow down possession, he communicates that. He makes timely cuts, knocks down open threes. And I think there's room for that type of player who uses his maturation to their advantage. And there's always room for adults in the NBA. Like you've seen some guys that are more talented than others flame out because they're not good teammates. I have no concerns about that with him.
Of course not.
And so I think I'll eventually bank on it, but I do think he's got one skill set, and if he's got to hang his hat on that, and that makes me a little worried about the short-term productivity. If he has a bad shooting year, like what's he going to bring you? We'll continue discussing. There's a couple more guys that are in this draft, but first I want to tell you guys about Prize Picks. In case you guys don't know what it is, let me tell you what Prize Picks is. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports or players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000 with basketball, hockey, college baseball entries, and more on Prize Picks, America's #1 sports fantasy app. Or fantasy sports app, I should say. Prize Picks has something for every sports fan, from basketball and hockey to League of Legends and everything in between. You can pick Anthony Edwards, Caitlin Clark, Connor McDavid, and Jude Bellingham all in the very same entry. I've played Prize Picks before, but since I work for the NBA, I can't really bet on make the picks on the NBA. But I've dabbled with baseball and even tennis, trying to pinpoint pitchers I think will exceed their strikeout totals and find players who serve big in tennis and try to guess more on the aces. So download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's Locked On NBA, and you'll get a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, welcome back to Locked On NBA Big Board. Leif, Thulin, and James Barlowe here. We're having a discussion about the history and the kind of the negative connotation of drafting older players. It hasn't worked out all that much. And then we're also discussing the positives of, right now it's more in vogue than it has been in years past. So there's some guys we like. There's others that we don't have that much faith in. We actually haven't talked about this guy. We've teased him early in this episode. Let me ask you about Tyler Kolek. He's one of my favorite watches in college basketball. And Richard would tell you I play like him, which I've gotten before. I think that one, like he said, might be a complexion-based comparison, but I like the way he plays, so I'll take it nonetheless. For those who don't know much about Tyler Kolek, he's a pick-and-roll operator. He was an All-American point guard the last 2 years, first team and second team, first team All-Big East the last 2 years for Marquette, led them to back-to-back 2 seeds. He's lefty, shot the ball a lot better this past year, conducts an offense and competes. He's kind of that tenacious, like, I'm that dude on a pickup court type of guard. How does that translate to the NBA? Does his age help him? Does his age hurt him? What's the deal on Tyler Kolek?
I'm still trying to figure it out. His college resume, you won't hear me argue anything against it. The film, it looks great. He makes every pass. He's a floor general. Does it translate to the NBA? I'm still trying to figure that out in a sense because I just don't know. It's hard to point guards are tough, man. It's hard it's hard for me to figure out what he's going to be able to do. I've seen some people want him to go to Phoenix. That's interesting to me. I don't know if Phoenix would do that. I still feel like Phoenix is kind of tinkering between. They may be a mid-season blow up somehow, and you kind of don't want to. I don't necessarily say be stuck with him, But if they blow it up mid-season, you might want to think we need to get younger because they don't have any draft picks, I don't believe. I've seen New York. People mocked him to New York. And again, they've had success. I guess you can call Jalen Brunson an old guard coming out of Villanova. And I've seen people say he is comparable to Jalen Brunson. I feel like there's only going to be one Jalen Brunson for a while. That dude is special. But I feel like I have Kolek in the second round. I think he's going to be a successful backup point guard. And you need backup point guards. I feel like Minnesota is going to need a backup point guard at some point soon. Mike Conley can't play forever. In that situation will work. I think he's an NBA player. I don't know at what the production is going to look like from him.
Yeah, I've got him 26th on my board, so we're not all that different. I think the reason I think he goes in the first round, and I think he will pan out in the NBA to the degree of, hey, he's going to be a solid player for a couple of years and maybe longer, is he makes everyone else better. And defensively, typically, you're going to look at the point guard as the weakest position on the court. And I don't think he's necessarily an exception to that rule, but he's not an absolute deficient defender. He uses his strength, and he's kind of rugged in the way that he plays. And the one concern I would have is how real is his shooting jump? Because I don't think his shot's beautiful.
It's got like a hitch to it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a quick motion lefty. Like it doesn't slow down like a hitch, but it kind of just goes up in one motion. And it goes in. He made his shots. He made threes. But people are more scared of his drive than they are of a shooter. So he's a guy that you can go under screens of, but he was still able to get to his spots. He used his left hand predominantly to finish, and he was excellent at it. His numbers at the rim are really good. He creates for others. In the short roll for Oso Ighodaro, he kicked out to shooters, makes everyone else better. So I think he's going to succeed in the sense of he uses that veteran presence of having played a lot of basketball to his advantage, even in the college game. I think he'll be able to impact second units, run them smoothly. Whereas sometimes you see a good point guard leave the floor and then the team looks devoid of an identity. I don't think that'll ever be with the case with him, and his headiness and competitiveness gets him playing time. And if you're drafting at 26, like I have him, or like James has him in the early second, and you get someone who can run your second unit, that's a win, even if they're not flashy numbers. So like think of what Tyus Jones has done. He's the best of this archetype of a table-setting backup point guard who's now been a starter.
TJ McConnell too.
TJ McConnell too, like those type of guys.
No drop off.
There's no drop off. Sometimes they even like have better plus minus splits, and like those type of guys have the best careers. If you're to look at the way they played in college, it's not too different from Tyler Kolek. And I know Tyus came out as a one and done, and that's why he's the best of that mold. But I think he uses his veteran guile to the plus side. So he's one I'd say I'm more in on than others.
I buy it. I dig it. Like I said, I don't, he can play. And I feel like on a bad team, it's not going to work out for him because you're just not, you don't need that on a bad team. Like we're trying to figure out who can play. We're trying to get better. But on a good team, Minnesota, New York, like it works because you need that, especially during this long 82-game season. These guys are getting hurt. Like you're going to need, when we don't need to play Brunson 38 minutes one night, we might need him to play 32. And then those 16 that you get from a Tyler Kolek is great. So I think if it doesn't work for him, it's because he's on a bad team, and like good players on bad teams, sometimes it just doesn't work out for them.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's talk about one more guy who I'd say I'm pretty out on. I've been out on the last 2 years when he's tested the waters. That's Kevin McCullar. Kevin McCullar has been a productive college player, had his best collegiate year this past year before dealing with injuries. And I'm not even going to talk about the injuries as the reason I have my doubts for McCullar. When he was at Texas Tech, I likened him to Torrey Craig and thought, man, there's a role for this type of guy. Even if he doesn't shoot well, his energy and his defensive activity is going to find him a spot. Well, the more he improved his offense, the less I felt like his game translated. And so maybe that's counterintuitive, but he doesn't do the little things as often in the collegiate game, and his health is starting to deteriorate. So if athleticism was his kind of calling card and the youth of like, oh, he'll get better at shooting, proved that he didn't get better at shooting, I'm a little out on him, more so than I was even 2 or 3 years ago when he was at Texas Tech. Since he went to Kansas, he improved his game, but he showed the deficiencies didn't get that much better. And from an NBA perspective, there's not that many Torrey Craigs out there anymore. Like he's right in the end of the bench for Chicago. and shooting is becoming so prioritized. The more film on him shows he's not a good shooter, and his athleticism, and I said I wouldn't harp on the injury, but his athleticism was his calling card. He's a little older, and he's got injury. So I'm out on Kevin McCullar. Am I crazy?
I don't think you're crazy. I agree 100% with you. I'm not necessarily buying the jump shot, and he just can't stay healthy. And it's unfortunate, but like you mentioned before, if you're not a great athlete and you're not a great shooter, and that's what you're supposed to like, those are your two things that you're supposed to do, it's going to be tough for him. I think he does a lot of good things. I think he is like a Swiss Army knife, and maybe this time away and he can refocus, but it's good. He's going to have to be a great shooter for him to stick. And of all of the old guys that we mentioned, he's probably my least favorite, just because of, like you said, the injuries, the consistency. It's a tough situation for him.
Well, and that's the crazy thing is, like, at times this year I saw him in the lottery because he started the year shooting well. And I was like, man, what are people watching? Like, I understand watching college basketball every Saturday. Like, I watched probably 25 Kansas games without even trying to watch film, just because I love college hoops. And McCullar was really good, but he didn't shoot well. His shot was changing. Like, every game, there's a new evolution, not for the better. And then you look at his defense, and I think even like his reputation preceded him. I don't think his defensive productivity was as good this year. And now I watched him at the combine, and he's on crutches. And I understand he just had a knee operation, but it's not like he's going to do himself any favors by shooting the lights out in workouts. So if a guy found himself into the top 15, the top 20 based on productivity in the year, then he finds himself at the edge of the first round with injuries and his shooting numbers proving that he's not a great shooter for 5 consecutive seasons, I don't see it personally. And so for those that are Kevin McCullar fans, of like, tell us why we're wrong, but I think there's a really compelling pitch for him more than any other player we said to say, okay, age showed who he is, and there's not, and the others, I think that there's attributes that demonstrated like, hey, this is what he is, but there's also growth potential. Like Dalton Knecht was a good shooter, but he became what I'd consider a great shooter, even though his numbers didn't change because of the diversity and the variety and the difficulty of his shooting. Whereas like Da Silva is a great shooter because he shot a lot of the same shots and he made them all the time. McCullar showed what he is the most of any of these players, and I think it's for the detriment of his draft stock, unfortunately.
And man, you're not going to get an argument from me there, Leif.
Okay, well, sometimes great minds think alike. Like I think we're on the same page with them. I think we're likely going to be right. I hope we're wrong, though.
I tell people all the time, man, I hope I'm so wrong on a lot of stuff, just because it's not about me. Like kids work hard for the situation to, and even when I bring him up all the time, like me and my brother, when I first started, we were talking about Justin Edwards, and everybody was like, oh, he's a top 5 pick. I was like, I don't see it. But
I was right there with you too.
You were there, yeah. I remember.
I listened to that podcast. I remember I was driving home from a Jazz game, and I was like, well, I've never met James, but I'm definitely on his team on this one.
But at the same time, like, I hope Justin Edwards makes $500 million playing basketball. Like, it's not about me if I have an evaluation and then you don't agree with it. Like, Kevin McCullar, please prove me wrong, because I know what it's like being in those gyms trying to figure it out. And it's not like he gets hurt on purpose, but it's just the film doesn't really lie. And unfortunately, the medical records don't really lie in his situation. So,
yeah, it's unfortunate, but let us know what you guys think about all these older prospects and what side of the debate you're on. James and I seem to be mostly aligned. We had a few points of difference, but mostly aligned. But next up, listen to Locked On NBA, where you're going to hear about playoff coverage. The conference finals are set. Good game 1 in the East. Tune into that. But also, I have one more request for you guys. Check this out. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's also now available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, and now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So thank you so much for making Locked On NBA Big Board your first listen. It's been a pleasure covering this one, and we got more great content coming up for you all the way until the draft. So thank you for listening, and peace out.